Hello, good afternoon or good morning, depending where you are. My name is Kurt Wood, and I'm a senior fellow with the Center for Digital Government. Today, we're going to have a 30-minute lunch and learn, and the focus of today's topic will be why connected data is so critical for state asset management. This is brought to you by Trimble and GovTech, of course. With me today will be an expert in this area, Dr. Charles Pilson, a principal with asset management of Mott McDonald. This topic here, just from my perspective, and just briefly before we speak with Charles, I'm a former CIO in a large state, and cabinet secretary, and I had the opportunity over the years to certainly appreciate and learn how important asset management is and the different industries within government. And I think, folks that don't have an appreciation for government, understanding how big and wide it is and the responsibility we all have in providing services to our constituents. But, as is important is really about the accountability of this, and, from project management, from kind of the fiduciary responsibility we all have, and certainly the safety of these, big projects that we deal with in state government and transportation and other sorts. So with me today, Charles Pilson, who has been in this business quite a few years. We're going to talk about, have a casual conversation, and pick up some observations and some learn some things here, and we'll save some time for some questions as well. So, Charles, if you just want to kind of give yourself just a very brief kind of background of who you are a little bit before we get going, so folks can at least get a little bit of understanding, and then I'll go right into some questions with you.
Sure thing, good. Yeah. So, Charles Pilson, the first thing I always start out with when I'm kind of in front of a crowd is my funny accent. So I come from Zimbabwe originally. Civil engineer by trade. I started out, with a civil engineering background, doing classic geometric design, things like that. I did a lot of pavement design. I did a lot of, stormwater design and things of those type of things. It was very interesting, and I had a whole career, if you like, in that before I moved over to this asset management field where I've really kind of found my niche. And I did that. I moved over to Austin, Texas, actually, to do a master's degree. I ended up doing a PhD, and it was kind of in this asset management optimization area. And so kind of never looked back since then. And right now, I'm part of the asset management group, a principal in the asset management side within Mott McDonald. And so that's where I'm coming from. I think that's probably enough there. Good.
Fantastic. And I can appreciate, the accent. I'm from Boston. So, there's been times when people have no idea what I'm talking about. So I appreciate it. I appreciate that. So I take it as a compliment. So anyway, so Charles, a great introduction. So let's talk a little bit about, this field, because I think, like I said, being in government, and certainly being involved in, this ability to kind of manage projects. And can you talk a little bit about your experience about, I know you've got a deep background in the transportation infrastructure background, but I think can you talk a little bit about kind of why this is really important? I mean, why is it so important? Why is it critical for us to make sure that, within our public projects and within this industry that, we have a good approach about, asset management?
Absolutely. So I always kind of start out with thinking about, when you're talking about the importance of asset management, think about some of the projects that we build. I think there are a lot of DOT folks on here, some of those giant projects. There's, it's absolutely incredible. I was looking through some of the projects that we've been involved with over the last few years, bringing up a few of them. There was a corridor in Singapore, 21.5 kilometers, including a 12.5 kilometer tunnel. You can imagine, giant project, right? There's a whole thing that we're doing where we're extending the tube in London, the famous tube, whole new Northern Line extension. Again, 3 kilometers worth. You can imagine how many assets are involved in that, quite apart from the tunnel itself. So anyway, what we're traditionally in the business of is generating these huge projects. But what do you do with them once they're built? And so a lot of energy and a lot of money goes into building them initially, but then they've got to be maintained, and they've got to be maintained for life cycles of 70 up to 100 years in some cases. So how do we manage that? And kind of flipping over to the data side, think about the data. There is, it's absolutely incredible how much data is coming online now, just in the last 10 years. You can imagine, I picked up some data points for a presentation that I did earlier. The first observation was that there's more data was created in the last 2 years than in the entirety of human history previously. Think about that. That's a lot of data. The second point that I brought up, 39% of CIOs have digital transformation as their most important task underway, and that's having to deal with a lot of that data. The third one was less than 50% of the structured data anyway, collected from IoT devices is used in decision making. Think about that as well. There's a lot of data, but it's not being used. We need to use it better. And that's where some of these tools come in. The last one that I had here was by 2030, around 50 billion IoT devices will be in use worldwide. That's Internet of Things. Think about that. So we are already getting more data than we can handle, and we're going to be inundated with considerably more data going forward. And so if we think about how to use that data in terms of asset management, what we need to do is be able to understand where the money is going. So all of this infrastructure, these giant projects that get built, how do they now go into service and be maintained and be updated over their lifetimes? And you can, again, imagine that there's a lot of tools out there that we have, but I don't think they're in a position where they're ready to handle the amount of data coming online. And we need to connect all that data. I mean, we have a lot of GIS out there. We have a lot of BIM out there, actually. We need to start thinking about digital engineering. We need to start thinking about digital twins, actually kind of continuous models. And some of these asset management systems that we deal with are essentially a form of digital twin. They're not updated every second necessarily, but they could be. That starts building us into intelligent assets. So, really we've got these models of these assets that are kind of intelligent, and we can start talking about smart infrastructure in general there. So the importance of asset management. I mean, a lot of you guys come from large agencies out there who own and operate, pretty much responsible for a huge number of assets. And the value of those assets is incredibly huge. Let's talk specifically about infrastructure assets. I think, for anyone in the audience who comes from an entity that owns assets, just think about, for a second, how much investment that is. Countrywide, road network alone is probably worth trillions of dollars. Well, is worth trillions of dollars. That's how much investment there is out there. Like North Carolina, where I'm located here, NCDOT, their maintenance budget alone is more than $1 billion annually. So asset management is about managing money in many ways. It's about managing the money going into those infrastructure assets. And so, if you're responsible for planning and budgeting for the investment that you're going to have to make over the next 20 to 50 years for those big projects, how much is that going to cost? And how do you actually put out that money and spend that money in the best possible way? How do you invest that money in that infrastructure? It's a huge responsibility. And ultimately, it's about that investment planning. So, again, imagine that you're responsible with coming up with an asset management plan. I know that many folks out there are from DOTs, so you'll know what I mean by transportation asset management plans required by federal highways. Just imagine you're responsible for coming up with an asset management plan for your set of physical assets over the next 10 years. How would you start? Think about it. Well, the answer really comes down to asset management. It comes down to asset management concepts, principles. It comes down to modeling and optimization, especially to develop the best strategies across all your assets. So that, those are some of the reasons that asset management is incredibly important. There's billions, if not trillions of dollars in play here.
Thanks, Charles. I mean, that was elegant in how you presented that. And I mean that seriously, because I think, in the context of, government, again, most of the audience here, state and local government, I know we have some legislative people on as well and other folks as well. But, at the end of the day, the responsibility of government, to manage these big projects. And again, when we talk about managing these projects, from thought to design to kind of the completion of the project. And you talked about, the sustainability and the maintenance of the project, and thinking about out years is so critical. And I think, in my experience in state government, certainly, the planning, the budgeting, but I think another area here that, certainly that asset management plays a big role in is really the oversight, the accountability, of successful projects, but also sometimes things happen, right? Government deals with crises at times, and, there's certainly, responsibility of that state agency or the regulatory authority, the oversight, the executive leadership of the state, whether it be the governor or the cabinet secretary or the agency head, commissioner, whomever, but having this data available and, having it, interoperable to the point where, you can actually do some detailed analysis. And I think your point about, modeling is so critical in government space around project safety, around out year costs. Can you talk a little bit more about kind of the modeling aspect of it? I know you kind of really, kind of hit on that before, but can you talk a little bit about how that kind of works, how, give it a practical kind of use case of that for the folks?
Yeah, so I really believe that data is super important in the here and now. What is the state of that system right now? Very important, no doubt about it. That's a lot of what we do. But the modeling part is really good. It's about projecting forward. What if I do this? What if I don't do anything? What is my best strategy going forward? And the modeling of the performance metrics that you come up with, and figuring out how those are going to deteriorate over time, and just as importantly, how they are improved by projects that you're doing on them, whether those are small little maintenance projects or whether they're large capital projects. Modeling that allows you to predict, and if you can predict, then you can optimize. And so maybe a couple of just examples of that. I have a colleague, Dave Juntonen. He came up through the bridge program at Michigan DOT and eventually led that program. His experience there was that they had some of the worst bridges in the country. He always tells the story, and their mission was to get to where they had 95% fair or better bridges. In other words, less than 5% poor. Well, it took him 18 years, and how did he do that? He did that by continuously monitoring the data and predicting at a very basic level. What he was predicting was how many bridges were going poor every year. Well, how do you do that? You have to have the data for it. You have to have the bridge inspection data coming in, and you have to be able to understand that if you can reduce that rate of bridges going poor every year by doing more preservation and increasing those kinds of activities, then you can slow down that deterioration overall and be able to really, you can't build your way out. You can't replace bridges fast enough at that rate. So what you've got to do is slow down the rate of deterioration of those bridges. So that was a data-driven way that took Dave 18 years to meet that goal that they had set themselves, but it came from data. Another quick example actually is we just recently did a quick little case study. I'll stick with structures here, just using modeling and optimization to show that if you had a number of different activities that you could use on your bridges, what if you just did the kind of big ones, deck replacements and bridge replacements, versus what if you also included in your toolbox all of those smaller ones, things like overlays on decks and just replacing joints and those kind of things. Well, in our little modeling and optimization case study that we did, we found that there was a 25% difference in cost between those scenarios, between using all the tools in your toolbox or just using your kind of worst first tools, where you're really kind of employing big capital projects to fix bridges at the end of their lives. And that's exactly the same thing as Dave's experience. In another dimension to that same case study, at a particular funding level, there was a difference of between 15 on a scale of 0 to 100 and 50 in the condition of those bridges. So that's a huge difference. If you think about 15%, if some of the bridge folks out there might know what I'm talking about, condition state 3 and 4, which is kind of poor or severe, versus 50% poor or severe. That is a huge, huge difference. So those are just a couple of examples, Kurt, of being able to use the data to get at the modeling, to be able to predict, to be able to optimize. And that's where you need tools and you need data.
I'd say this, and I think you mentioned earlier, you and I were talking before the webinar started, but I think of the days of spreadsheets, right? And I know there are people still out there that use spreadsheets to make decisions, right? And God love them. But I think in the context of what we're talking here, really, when you brought up the Internet of Things, critical, I think about, certainly in the transportation, infrastructure, and you talk about bridges and roads and tunnels and things of that nature that are part of our critical infrastructure of all of our states and our nation, and everything that is, dependent on bridges, roads, and tolls, and not tolls, but bridges, roads, and tunnels. I look at some of the technology. You talked about IoT, and I look at drone technology today. I look at the different sensors that are out there, to be able to connect us. So when we talk about, this from a connected technology perspective, certainly we can't handle this. Dave couldn't handle this today in a spreadsheet. I'm sure at some point in his career he may have, right? But I think at the end of the day, today's, platform, and I think that's, if you could talk a little bit about that, because really what you're really talking about is, certainly making sure that you have the structure and the discipline and, the mechanism to be able to make sure that we collect the right data, but we need to make sure that data gets into I don't want to use the word central location, but available for the data scientists or the business users to be able to kind of really aggregate and look and slice and dice that data. Because again, when we talk about this, I think about, the different people that need to see the different data. It may be the foreman on the job that's out on the highway running the detail that day. It could be the general manager of the organization. It could be the financial, the budget people. It could be the governor. It could be the legislature. So, having this data available and all these pieces of data available that you can slice and dice in today, you got to have a software platform. Would you agree? I know you would agree with that, but can you talk a little bit about that?
There's actually 2 levels of that, Kurt. Yeah, so very interesting. Again, the most basic level is just what you've got and what condition it's in, and potentially what the history is for that particular asset. And so whenever I think of data, it's got to run in things. You've got to have that architecture. That's the plumbing. And being able to have that data available to everybody who needs it very easily at any time requires some really sophisticated plumbing. And of course, that plumbing is what we do a lot of, right? Just we as a community, that's where computers come in. And so it's very important to have that plumbing to make that data available at that most basic level. So that's the first thing. But when you're starting to talk about asset management, it's not good enough to just know where assets are and what condition they're in right now. You need to know what the plan is, what the future is, what is the best strategy for maintaining those assets. And that's really the key to asset management. I think, again, if you're asking about where the tools come in, I'm going to take a little bit of a rabbit hole here. So one of the examples I give about the sort of asset management optimization problem is, imagine that you just have 5 things that you can do to an asset. Let's say it's a bridge or a road in any one year, 5 different possibilities, including do nothing, of course, right? So now if you think about the number of different possible strategies for that asset over just 10 years, the number of possible strategies is 5 in the first year, things that you can choose from, multiplied by 5 in the second year, things you can choose from. So it's 5 times 5, multiplied by 5 again. So it's 5 to the 10. Well, 5 to the 10, I haven't put it in my calculator recently, but I think it's a good couple of million different possible strategies over 10 years just for that one asset. Now imagine that you've got 2 million, let's say it's 2 million different possible strategies for that one asset, and you've got 100 assets. Well, you can choose from 2 million different possible choices for the first asset, multiplied by 2 million for the second asset, multiplied by 2 million for the third. Well, you try and put that in your calculator, it's 2 million to the power of 100. And that's a small problem. That'll give you E on your calculate every time. So the second problem, the problem of being able to generate strategies and more importantly, optimal strategies for these, billion, $trillion investments that we have out there, that takes some serious computing power and some serious sophistication in the software to be able to do that modeling and most importantly, that optimization. Find those best strategies. And that is true kind of asset management out in the future there.
That's great. I'm seeing we've got a couple of questions coming in, but before we get to a couple of questions, Charles, when you think about kind of this discipline and this structure that is in place today, just out of curiosity, I mean, you're an expert in this area and you work in this area. You've had the opportunity, the experience to work with many public agencies in your career. Do you find at times? I mean, how does the agency? How does that DOT agency? How does that Department of Transportation agency? Are they ready for this? I mean, I think my personal feeling at this point is like it's a necessity. You can't do without it. But how do you kind of bridge that gap? No pun intended. But how do you actually kind of help that organization through this? Because to me, what we're talking about today, it's massive. It's a huge responsibility from a government perspective. It's a huge responsibility from a project perspective. Just delivery of the services, all these things, safety and fiduciary. All these things come into it. In your experience in working in these platforms and working in this data, management, data analysis, and then making sure that, things are all connected and that we're using all the information we have, not only to make sure that we build a successful program, but we also can sustain it, or we can identify, issues or challenges, and we can cost model it. How do you kind of work with the state customer or local customer in this? That customer or that that team that actually has that responsibility for kind of making sure these things are successful. How do you kind of work with them to help them through this? Because it seems to me can be overwhelming at times.
No, for sure. Absolutely. I think, over my career, I've worked with any number of fantastic folks at big agencies such as DOTs, visionaries. They're able to drive these initiatives essentially and really see the long-term vision. And I think that's where it starts. I mean, I think it's always got to come from the agency, from those asset stewards, we can call them. They're the stewards of their infrastructure. So it starts at the top. And then, of course, you do need the folks who really do understand this at the detailed IT level, the detailed, kind of software and hardware architectures to be able to connect all this data, to be able to bring it in efficiently, clean it, scrub it, QA it, bring it in, use it for modeling, use it for future, what if scenarios, and ultimately, figure out long-term planning across, as I say, in some cases, billions of dollars. So I think, that's a pretty short answer there, Kurt, but yeah, it starts at the top and then you've got to drive it down and make it actually happen on the ground. And that's interesting.
Yeah, you brought up, thank you. And you brought up, the kind of the IT side of the house. And certainly I served as a CIO. I also, came from the operations background. So I certainly think I have an appreciation. I think what I would say, especially today, the dependency on one another within, a large organization, such as a Department of Transportation or an infrastructure agency, that has this responsibility. And certainly there's certainly a technology override here. I mean, at the end of the day, we can't build things without having technology today. And it's not just about the IT folks. And I look at this, a lot of this business technology or occupational technology or engineering technology, so to speak. I think at the end of the day, though, the responsibility for these big projects is really at the agency level and the business level. So, having those, to your point, having the people that can work aside each other, from the leadership, because again, projects are successful when everybody's engaged. When you have executive leadership, you have oversight, you have the ability to be flexible, agility. Government works in crisis management day to day. Things happen in government every day. So the government has to prepare. And I think my point being is, having a flexible platform and having that data to be able to drive you to certain decisions based on events, because things happen, weather events happen, accidents happen, all things, financial limitations, or budget shortfalls at times, or safety issues could shut a project down, for a long time. So having this data, having the ability to kind of, take that left and take that right during a project is critical. So certainly having, a platform, and the technology and the right people invested in it is critical for success. So I appreciate you touching on that. I do have a couple of questions here, just one from the audience, and this more from a, we haven't talking specifically about products, but when you talk about these, when you talk about this platform, you talk about using the data in today's world. In your experience, are we talking about mostly, SaaS products or products hosted in the cloud today, or are these kind of like mix and match on-premise things? Because that brings a whole other area of, challenges when you talk about that. Can you speak to that at all?
I mean, I know if there's a lot of IT folks in the audience, I mean, you guys know that way better than I do in many ways. I'm definitely seeing a huge move towards SaaS. There's a lot of really good high-powered computing power out there in the cloud. Whether that's Amazon Web Services, Azure, whatever it is. That's, in my personal opinion, that's definitely the way to go for sure. But again, okay. It's you don't have 100% control over that. But
okay. And then another question is the acceleration of AI or generative AI, to be more specific, impacting what you're doing or thinking about when it comes to this? I mean, I presume, it's everywhere, right? Omnipresent today. 100%. But any thoughts on that, or again, considerations?
100%. I could go on at length about this. The short answer is absolutely. There's no doubt about the amount of data requires a fair amount of AI. And AI, if you think about, a lot of AI is about pattern recognition. And so you can start immediately seeing where that's going to go. It's going to go into the ability to model, the ability to predict. And I see a lot of AI going into that side of things. AI is not explicitly optimization. So that's not really part of the equation here. Now, there's a gray area in between the two. There's no doubt about it. But ultimately, I see most of it going into the modeling side at the moment, cleaning of data and then modeling data to be able to predict, because that's what we need to feed into these high-powered software systems that do the optimization for us. And maybe quick glancing blow at your comments about reacting. That's another thing about these systems. Once we've got that plumbing really well organized and those systems set up, then they are big what-if scenario generators. The ability to turn out an answer about what if this, what if we cut these folks funding and gave $50 million to those guys, that's huge. The ability to analyze that and figure out what the best way to handle those kinds of scenarios over time, that's the power of these tools. These tools can give you a lot of that.
That's great. We have one question, and we've got about a minute left after this. So how important is a connected data environment for agencies?
I mean, extremely important, let's put it that way. Otherwise, data gets wasted. And, some folks might have seen a graph out there, a classic kind of graphic where we generate and we compile all sorts of data. It goes up and up and up. And then we move on to the next phase of a project and we lose half of it. And then we start all over again and we build it up and we build it up. That's not how it should be. We need that data to be connected. It needs to be available at all stages. And so extremely important. I mean, data is what drives all of this.
Yeah, I mean, preaching to the choir, I think, certainly in government, I think, it can be a challenge at times, with sharing data, depending on organization, jurisdiction, regulatory, statutory. But I think to your point about, having that data, or having it connected, having it available, having the right platform, having the right people, at the end of the day, really puts itself in place to be successful, to be safe, to be efficient, to be cost efficient, to project. Again, we have a responsibility in government, around our critical infrastructure, which certainly the roads are, and other pieces of it as well. So we're almost out of time. Charles, thank you. Any closing thoughts for the audience? I mean, this has been wonderful. I mean, I've learned stuff every day. I think it's so critical that we focus on this and we pay attention to this, and we keep things going. Any final thoughts for the audience?
I mean, I would say that data is great, but data is not information, and until it becomes actionable information, it's very little use. So it's really about what we do with the data. How can we turn our digital twins into, intelligent, automatons that really predict what the best situation is, the best strategy is to go forward. So what we do with the data is by far the most important. And I think that requires some really good tools. It requires people, requires processes, but it also requires some sophisticated software tools.
Thank you, Charles. And with that, we will close. Folks, thank you today. Thanks for joining us today. Thank you, Dr. Pilson. Fantastic webinar, good information. Thank you to our sponsor, Trimble, and also to our GovTech community. This recording will be made available, I think, within 48 hours to the people that have registered for this event. So once again, Charles, thank you. And thank you to the audience for joining us today. And we look forward to a continuing resource for everybody. Thank you and have a great day.
Thanks, good.